I think for a very long time, I was struggling in the sense that I felt like I had to figure out how to present myself where I was neutral enough to be accepted, but opinionated enough to make an impact. And I think like we exist in a world where a lot of people are trying to be neutral. Like a lot of people are trying to chase an ideal where everything that they say um, leaves room for every perspective to be considered. And I think that's amazing. You know what I mean? Like I think it's amazing that um, we are taking the time to consider other people's points of views. I think it's amazing that there is such an engaging community that wants to make everyone feel seen and heard and accepted. But I think what happens in that is like what we've started to do is subconsciously we're so aware that anything that we could say, if it were to be opinionated, would exclude a certain group. So it's like if I were to express that something annoyed me, then it's like whatever inflicted the thing that annoyed me, I'm like automatically pinning myself against. In like a subtle way, like it doesn't have to be that deep. But I find like this is like a little it's just like a little like I guess example of like the moment you express anything that like is tinted with a bit of color, it kind of like leans one way or leans another way. So it's like if I'm happy, I'm not sad. Like if I'm angry, I'm not like overjoyed or excited. You know what I mean? And it's like this is just with feelings. Once you start to have opinions about things that are going on in the world, once you start to have opinions about like interactions with people, especially, I think that kind of puts you in a container a bit of like, okay, this person believes in XYZ. But it's like I feel like anything I've ever felt or thought or done, it's always been contextual. Like it's always been circumstantial. It's always been based on like a set situation. So there are so many complex triggers that can like trigger a reaction in a person in a moment. And I think at the end of that, like every time I've experienced something and I've released it, I kind of just come back to myself and I'm like, okay, like it was not that deep. And like I don't take anything personal and blah, blah, blah. And I think when you are someone who's actively doing the inner work, it's very easy to come back to that place where you're like in the big picture and you're fine, you're happy, and you're good. But I don't think that like invalidates everything else that you've ever experienced in those moments of like heightened opinion and thought. And I think like a big realization for me was like, okay, emotions are realizations. The only time you will ever feel something, especially intensely, is like when your body is realizing something that it didn't know before. So like emotions carry very strong messages. And I think the reason that we feel it out in the world, especially in places of like injustice or in moments where we don't feel seen, normally that's what triggers like a very strong reaction from people, especially like on a more opinionated level, is when they feel like a part of them is not being acknowledged or heard or seen. And I think that the reason we start to have these like expressions is because like we've kind of observed a world and our experience of it is going to relay an understanding, and that understanding is not going to always be neutral. And I find like when it comes to especially like creating content or like having a voice that you want to share or putting yourself out there, like in whatever capacity, there's always like a message that people want to share. There's always kind of like something that like people are like, okay, like here's a microscope, like what is it that you have to say? But I feel like everything is momentary. Like sometimes I really have to say something and then it's like the next hour, like I don't really care that much about it to say, or like the next hour I'm like so fascinated with this new thing that like I want to show the world and share the world. And so like, yeah, that was like definitely a block for me, because I was like, okay, if I want to get started, like I probably need to have like a niche of some kind. Like I probably need to know what it is I'm going to be talking about. And like really what our brain is just doing is like it's very afraid of doing something, especially like exposing yourself to the world. Like it's a very, very vulnerable thing. I think creatives in general, like every creative I've ever met, their biggest source of inspiration is their emotions. Like it's such a vulnerable thing to put yourself out there, like put your heart into something that you're doing, and like at the end of the day, like it could go to shit, or like someone could perceive the wrong way, or blah blah blah, especially when you're putting yourself out there to like a group of people who all have like different opinions in a certain moment. Our brain fears that. Like our brain is very afraid. It's afraid of being like exposed to something that could like hurt you. And so what it will start to do is we'll start to come up with all these like reasons as to why you're not ready. Like, it's more that you could do to be prepared, blah 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 blah. And like, it's just really promoting procrastination because your brain is so afraid of what's unfamiliar. Your brain is so afraid of what it cannot control. Your brain is so afraid of like being put in a position where you're kind of surrendered to something that you captured in a moment where you're feeling a certain way, and then it doesn't have that control to maybe take it back. And I don't think you should take anything back ever, really. I think like anything that anyone ever experiences is like valid enough to be heard and seen. But I think that like we live in a world that is very centered around image, and a lot of people are so afraid of like saying something genuine and true because it could tarnish their image. So it's like, if you feel something in a certain moment, or if you feel annoyed, or if you feel irritated, or if you feel like someone did something that you don't really agree with, but it is like the majority collective opinion, then like you expressing yourself automatically like puts you in an opponent position to these other things, when it's really not that deep. So yeah, I kind of felt like I had to fit a certain box in order to put myself out there, to know what I was going to do, to know what I was going to say, to know what side I was on, really, to make an impact. Because like, I don't think anything neutral ever makes an impact, because it's like it negates any impact it could have. Like, if you were to say one thing that would like pull you on the side of the spectrum, and the moment you neutralize yourself by saying something here, you're back in the middle. And like, anything that is like has no like pull really like has no pull, it like has no impact. So I think there was a phase in my life where I was like, I'm gonna stop being neutral. I always used to be the person to like justify everything, because it's easy. Like, it's easy to put yourself in someone else's shoes. It's easy to be like, okay, like I see what you're feeling. I think it's like such a fear-based thing too. Like, and it's from the heart. It's from understanding, absolutely, but it's also fear-based, because it's so easy for us to be like, it's easy for us to justify things that we don't agree with if we are willing to put ourselves in someone else's shoes. And that kind of makes us feel safe, it makes us feel comfortable, and it makes us feel like we weren't necessarily targeted. And I think our brain always wants to resist being targeted, and I don't think anyone's ever really like targeted per se. I think everyone's just having an experience. But yeah, I think that unless you're willing to face the vulnerability and the fear of being authentically yourself in a world that has a lot of opinions, your brain is always going to kind of push you back. So this was like a big thing that I had like a realization this morning. So I had to feel like I had to know everything, for like, not just for me to take myself seriously, but for the world to take me seriously. But I kind of also realized like the world will take you as seriously as like you take yourself. Like, have you ever met someone and they told you they do something and like it felt real? Like, then you will just question them for the sake of questioning them. It's like, you do things because like, the moment you start doing something, you're learning it, and the moment you start learning it, you can start applying it. So yeah, anyways, I kind of woke up in the morning and I realized like I just had to shake myself out of it, because this is something that was like sitting in the background for a while. I think our brain has a lot of things that just sits in the background that we don't want to deal with, and then we keep pushing and we keep procrastinating because we're like, okay, it's not time yet. Like, it's not time yet. I'll deal with it when it's time. But it's because we're running away from the discomfort of actually facing something that is like making us feel really vulnerable. So I kind of woke up in the morning, I was like, am I going to keep doing this? Because it's like, I could look back and I was like, man, like if I started a year ago when I decided to procrastinate, I would probably be in a different place than I am now. And I think this applies to anything, like not just with creating, but like literally anything in life. Like, if a person wants to start going to the gym to feel healthier, to feel stronger, and they keep pushing to tomorrow, suddenly tomorrow's next year, and then 5 years from now, and then 10 years from now, and you're like, man, like if I started when I actually wanted to start, like I would be in a like much healthier shape right now. Or when someone wants to like quit an addiction, so let's say they're addicted to like nicotine, and they're like, oh my god, like I'm just like, your brain wants to feel like it's in control, so it will convince itself that it's deciding to postpone the time because it doesn't feel like it wants to yet. And And like your brain's really good at doing that because it's like really you versus yourself. So it's like, unless you're willing to look yourself in the mirror and be like, what am I running away from? And then realizing that what you're actually running away from is like the fear of vulnerability, and just kind of powering through anyway and being like, this is who I am. At the end of the day, every single person, like, it doesn't really matter what you're saying so much as like the essence of like how you show up in the world and makes an impact. Like, I find two people could say the exact same thing, but I will receive it differently based on the energy that was like of how it was being said or like how it was being expressed. And I think as human beings, like, we have such a natural tendency to like pick up on the intentions of people around us. So it's not more so like, what is this person presenting? But it's always like the question of like, what is this person trying to present? And I think that's really what we're picking up on is like the essence of it. But then when you meet someone who's like actually not trying to present anything, it's so refreshing, because I think that's something we crave. Like, I think we crave that as like people to like see like energy that is just existing as itself and accepting and meeting itself where it is and like presenting that person. I think it makes us feel so seen and heard, and I think that's the impact like would be made if someone just decides to meet themselves where they are and show that to the world and like claim that. So yeah, I had that realization and it was big for me. So I was like, okay, I'm going to actually start doing this and like take myself seriously. So yeah, that's just to say, man, like, you don't have to know everything to do anything. You don't have to know anything to do everything. It really just comes down to you and how much discomfort you're willing to look yourself in the mirror and face. And I think that once you decide to do that, I think the world opens up, because you're actually able to look at the possibilities of like what would happen if you kept doing the things that you're now able to start facing.